Hi, everyone. This is Library Bev at the Palouse Library. I am doing my first YouTube interview with for the rural library system. And we actually have a YouTube channel, and this will be played on that. I suggest that you go there and check us out and hit subscribe. And if you like this video, like it. And also, if you have suggestions for other videos that you'd like to see, you can put that in the comments. So here is why I'm doing this interview. One day I was looking at my Facebook and this photo popped up with a link to Failed Utopia. It was a podcast. And I thought, well, stuff pops up on my Facebook all the time, but this one had a name attached to it, Anna Roberts. And she's a young lady that grew up here in Palouse. My kids know her, I know her. And I was like, is that Palouse's Anna Roberts? Well, sure enough, it is. So I listened to Failed Utopia, her podcast, and I was hooked. Her production of it, her speaking, the information, I mean, just everything about it just drew me in, and I just love listening to it. It's just a lot of fun, and it's an interesting topic, and that's why I started having questions like, why would Anna pick this? Why is Anna a podcaster? So I talked to Anna, and she's willing to do this interview. And I have a little bit about Anna. Anna Roberts is a podcaster and a freelance editor for fiction and nonfiction books. Her background includes working as a freelance writer and also several years working at WSU. She currently lives on the Palouse and works from home. When not working on her podcast, her hobbies include cooking, reading, and music. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Bev.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here.
Yeah, this is a new world for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to go right into some of my questions, my burning questions about why you became a podcaster. And that's my first question is, how did you decide to do this?
Well, it was a little bit of a roundabout way, but last year I had left my job with WSU and started my own business, my editing business. And so I was sort of looking for maybe a way to expand my services and have more offerings for clients. And so I decided to learn how to start producing podcasts. And my idea was not to create my own podcast, but to offer production services on a freelance basis, like to edit and produce other people's podcasts. So I started doing that. And of course, I loved it. It was really fun to learn. But while I was going through the process, I realized that I needed something to practice on, to actually learn by experiencing it, and so that I knew for sure how to do each step. And so I thought, well, why just practice on like dummy content or just record something just to learn? I might as well actually create something while I'm going through this process. And so that's how it all came about. I had this idea and I just started working on it as something to practice on, and it sort of took on a life of its own. So that's how I got into it.
That's wonderful. And podcasts, they're called shows, right? I always
they're sometimes called shows, sort of in the same vein. You might hear somebody talk about a radio show, and then within that, there are individual episodes. So similar with podcasting.
And that's kind of when I try to introduce some of my patrons to podcasts. They kind of have this look like, what the heck is that? And and I explained to them exactly what you said. It's sort of like having a radio, like an old time radio show. I used to listen to them. Not that I was that old, but they were replayed when I was younger. And so it was fun to listen to the radio. And I think podcasts are just kind of, I don't know how long they've been in existence, because I've kind of coming late to the game, so to speak, but there's just a huge variety of podcasts. I listen to several that are related to sewing and quilting. And my husband listens to one. I got him hooked on listening to ones about the presidents of the United States. And so he's now searching madly for different types of podcasts. And I keep saying, you got to listen to Anna's podcast.
Oh, thank you.
So your podcast is called Failed Utopia, and I will just do a little blurb. I have her shirt.
Oh, yes, awesome.
And why did you pick that topic?
Well, that's such a good question, Bev, and I would love to know the answer because people, of course, have been asking me this question since I came out with it, and it's not like I was some kind of subject matter expert. I'm not a cult deprogrammer or anything like that. It may have seemed random to people who know me, but I cannot for the life of me remember exactly how I came up with the idea. And I know that sounds crazy, but I will say I just come up with ideas for all sorts of stuff all the time. I just think of stuff and then I jot them down in the notes app on my iPhone. And so I have these lists of just usually very strange things that I've thought of or that have crossed my mind at some point in time. Maybe it's an idea for something concrete like a blog or something to write about. But in this case, Failed Utopia was just in this list of a bunch of stuff that I had thought of, and actually some other podcast ideas and other random things. And so, like I said, when I was learning how to do podcast production, I needed, some idea, and I had a few, but when I came across this again in my notes, it just sort of started incubating in the back of my mind. And once I was thinking about it, it was, I think they call it the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Oh.
It's frequency bias. So once you start thinking of something or you learn something new, you just start seeing it everywhere. Has
Mhm.
that ever happened to you?
Yes, I
Yeah.
totally agree. Yes.
So you have a conversation with a friend or you learn a new word and then you open up a book and you're, oh my gosh, there's that word. It's in there. It happens all the time. It's just a type of cognitive bias. But it really did take on a life of its own once I had it in the back of my mind and I started coming up with ideas for episodes just everywhere I looked or in conversations. And I would think, oh, that's a failed Utopia episode. um, so that's kind of how I got onto it. I decided, this is probably the idea for me because I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Mhm.
So that's how I went with it. And I do have an interest in extreme communities, cults, the idea of a utopia at all. And
Mhm.
so I think it was something that is of great interest to me. And I've really enjoyed just learning more about it as I've done the research.
Well, your research certainly comes through for you because the um, the different topics or the different podcasts that you've had are things that I've never heard of. Utopias that I've or cults that I've never heard of. And growing up in Oregon, we had the Rajneeshis
Oh,
cult.
yes.
So I think that was like in the 70s,
Yeah,
late
and I think it
70s.
was still around in the 80s too.
Mhm.
I
And
kind of remember that
yeah, and
actually.
I mean that was on our news channels, like when it was really hot in Oregon, it was always on the news. And so that's
Hmm.
actually the only utopia type thing, and that was definitely a failed utopia for
Yeah,
sure
big
from the
big
very
fail.
beginning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, so how many podcasts do you have right now running?
This is the only podcast I have, and I've done I think I just released my ninth full episode, and then I have a couple of short bonus episodes.
Mhm.
So Failed Utopia launched in November of last year, 2020. And I released 4 full episodes at once, just because I wanted to give people a chance to binge a few episodes and get a sense of what it was about. Is this podcast for me? Kind of get people who might be interested hooked so they would subscribe and keep listening. And then since then, I've been doing a new full episode every 2 weeks. So every other Tuesday, a new episode comes out. And it takes a lot to do all the research and writing and
Mhm.
recording and editing. And so
Yes.
right now, the every 2 week schedule is working well for me as far as how much time I can spend on it. I do have ideas for other podcasts, and right now I don't exactly have the time to devote to it. But in the future, yeah, I hope that maybe I can do some other podcasts. And like I was saying, work with other people on their podcasts and do some of the editing and some of that time consuming work to take off their plate as well.
Right. You definitely, like you said, you just started this because you were working for other people and, you're writing for other people and stuff. And then here it comes. And so now here you are, you've learned a lot and I would say you're very valuable in the podcast world now.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I hope that's true.
So how many failed utopias have there been? I mean, do you have like a long list, like you said, you have your notes on your phone. Do you have a lot? Are there a lot of utopias?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Oh, Bev. Oh, Bev. I did not know when I started working on this just how extensive this field could actually be. I knew about a few, like you were saying, the Rajneeshis. Of course, I knew about Jonestown, a few of the other more infamous sort of cults. And of course, those are extreme examples of utopias gone wrong. They don't always get to that point. But when I initially started, I thought, well, maybe this could be sort of a limited series. Some podcasts don't go on indefinitely. Maybe they have 6 or 10 episodes on a topic. But when I started really looking into it, I found, I mean, just right now as we're speaking, there are thousands of cults in operation all over the world.
Oh my
Thousands.
goodness.
Yeah, that blew my mind. I had no idea. I thought, there's a couple here, a couple there, and usually they kind of implode, but actually currently operating, that's how many there are. And then you have all the ones going back historically, all the way back really to the beginning of history.
Mm.
And so but before I knew that, I had started thinking of ways to expand the series and so that I wouldn't run out.
Mhm.
Didn't know there was no danger of that.
No kidding.
But so I came up with all sorts of other utopian ideas or concepts. So those are still in the works. I'm going to have episodes on the internet, on artificial intelligence, on all sorts of futuristic ideas as well. Why don't we have the utopian future that had been imagined decades ago? Why don't we have limitless energy? Why don't we have flying cars? So there's all these utopian ideas that have been out there for decades. Even from prior centuries, actually. And those are going to be really interesting to delve into. Why didn't they turn out to be the utopian solutions that
Mhm.
we expected, that we want? What are all the problems that have arisen? The internet is a great example of this. I mean, when the
Oh
internet
yes.
first started, there was so much utopian hope, the potential of the internet connecting the whole world and limitless knowledge. And in some ways that has come to pass, but it's created a whole world of problems that
Mhm.
we haven't figured out the solutions to as well. So there's all of
Yes.
that. And then I also, as far as looking for more episode ideas, I came up with the idea of doing the occasional fiction takeover because there's so many dystopian books and
Yes,
movies
there
and all
are.
sorts of media. And that's such a popular genre. It's one of my favorite genres, actually. I'm reading Ready Player Two, the
Oh,
Ernest Cline, of course, book that came out in November. And so I'm thinking of doing maybe an episode on the Ready Player One universe, the Oasis. Um, I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's sort
no.
of this virtual world where you're fully immersed, and people sort of stop wanting to live on the outside world and just live in this virtual world, the
Mhm.
Oasis. And of course, problems arise.
That's right.
So I have a bunch of ideas too for fictional dystopian worlds to just talk about and break down in the context of failed utopia.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. When I read Ready Player One, um, though the technology part was I'm not totally into VRs. The library has stuff to check out and things like that. But
Mhm.
the concept of the 1980s, so that's when I was a young adult. So there was many references to that era that I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that video game, or and that was
Mhm.
all pretty new. So yeah,
Oh
well, I
yeah.
look forward to to those type of episodes. I think that would be really interesting. And our at the library, the young adult section, YAs behind my shoulder here,
Oh yeah.
young adults, um, they they're the books written. What I find is a lot of utopian worlds.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Of course, my brain is blank, but and I just find that really interesting. Just some of it is disturbing. Even
Mhm.
as young adult books, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would want my kid to read about this. But it's
Yeah.
the imagination of the authors is quite quite interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's neat to see how it connects back to our current world and sort of where we are currently headed with technology. Because that's what it's all about, right? These fictional dystopias. You can see the threads of the life we're currently living
Hmm.
and kind of make those connections, which that's a very interesting part of it to me.
Yes, yeah. To make it relatable to, like you said,
Hmm.
to today's world, it's kind of alarming
Yeah,
that
it can be. Yeah.
yeah, books like 1984, are like,
Hmm.
wow,
Exactly.
that stuff's coming true. So,
Hmm.
well,
Yeah.
are there any are there utopias utopian worlds, utopian cultures that have not failed?
That's very interesting to dive into, and I'd have to say it's debatable. For me personally, based on what I've learned, I don't think a true utopia is possible, and it's sort of almost by definition, it's going to involve groups of people and with differing opinions and different ways people want to live and different religious beliefs, to have sort of this total harmony of thought and coexistence. It that I mean that almost immediately takes you to dystopian concepts
Mhm.
of mind control, sort of suppressing the free thinkers and the rebels in the group.
Mhm.
And if we look at some of these groups, including ones that I've already done episodes on, that's the first place they go wrong. They're looking for sort of this smooth road where everyone is equally happy to live by some set of rules or, diktat or whatever it may be. And there's always those people who don't like it for some reason.
There's always a
And
dissenter, right?
yeah, there is, and it's usually for good reason too.
Mhm.
The way things are set up, many times it's exploitative of some of the group's members, or something like that, or the leader gets a little too much taste of power and it becomes a dictatorship.
Mm.
And so when I kind of it's like, yeah, of them we could say haven't failed. Maybe they still exist. One of those that I talked about, I think it was just my second episode about the Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland. They've been around for, gosh, like 60 years, and they're still going. I mean, they still operate. They're just a community of sort of spiritually minded people. It's kind of a new age community, but they don't have these rigid beliefs. They don't have a specific religious doctrine they stick
Mm,
to. They're about sustainability and yeah, it's kind of new agey. And it's like,
mhm,
okay, they're still there. In a way, we can say that it is successful. The residents appear to be very happy with their lifestyle. It seems to be a lovely place, actually. But on the other hand, they set out to create a model for the rest of the world. And that's
mm,
what a lot of these groups do. They say, okay, well, we're going to start with a couple hundred people, and then when the rest of the world sees how well it's worked and how amazing we are and how
mhm,
wonderful our way of life is, they're all going to start doing the same thing. And that hasn't happened. So, in that sense, I have to say it hasn't really succeeded because it's still this insular, small, community of a few hundred people after decades and decades and decades.
mhm.
So, that's why I say it's debatable. We could say for the people who live there, maybe it's a utopia, but they don't live free of conflict and problems
Because there's the
either.
big outside world that's all around them. Yeah. So
Right.
they have their little spot in the world, but if they're not accepted or people won't work with them, buying their products or whatever, then yeah, it's not a complete utopia.
Right. And yeah, and that just goes back to my point. You might have a little slice of paradise, but you're never going to assume realistically that it comes without problems, without conflict, dissatisfaction. Um, so yeah, I mean that's the big question, right? That's the
Yeah.
that's the question that we look at, and it's very
Mhm.
interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, Anna, I think we've covered all of my burning questions that I had for
Okay.
you. I would like to encourage the Whitman County Library YouTube followers to check out Anna's Failed Utopia podcast. Um, when this gets edited, her links will be below, and you can follow her links. You're on Facebook, and of course, your podcast can be um, listened to on many different platforms. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So people who want to follow along on Facebook, I do post things there. It's at Failed Utopia Pod. And yes, the links will be below. I also have a website for Failed Utopia. It's just failedutopia.com. And all of the episodes are posted there with other information. My merchandise, the wonderful t-shirt, for example. Thank you, Bev. So that's all on the website. And as far as listening, if I could just say something for those maybe who have never even tried out a podcast before, you were right in what you were saying earlier that they've been around for a while. They've really exploded over the past 10 years or so. I think they've been around in some form for 15 years ish. But they've gotten more and more popular. I think there's over 1 million podcasts
No
on
way. Oh my
way
gosh.
on Apple Podcasts right now. They're not all active, but it's fun to go back and listen to old podcasts too. I find stuff from a few years ago all the time, and I'll go back and binge listen.
Wow.
But whatever someone is interesting, I guarantee you that you will find something in a podcast to listen to. I mean, there's
Yeah,
just every
that's a
subject
lot.
you can imagine. Yeah. But I think even so, there's only, I'm not sure the exact statistic, but I think only like a half of Americans have actually tried out listening to a podcast. So there's still millions of people out there ready to discover this awesome medium. And
Yes.
one of the coolest things about podcasts is they are free. They're 100% free to listen to. And so all you need to do, there's a couple ways to listen, but people can download a podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. Those are some popular ones, but there's a ton out there. You can just download it, browse for new things, or use the search bar and look for Failed Utopia, for example,
Mhm.
and that'll bring it up. If you subscribe, the app will keep track of the episodes for you. You can even have it notify you and let you know when there's a new episode so you never miss one. Um, so it's pretty easy to do. And like I said, it's free. And for those who maybe don't use a smartphone or they don't want to download another app, most podcasts like Failed Utopia have a website. And so what we do is embed the episode straight onto the website. And you can just go there, click on the episode, and then you can play it right there inside your web browser. So you don't have to go out to an external app or anything like that. So that's another easy way for people to get into it who have never tried it before.
Great. That is really good information. I, like I said earlier, I try to encourage my patrons to, especially ones that are relying heavily on their devices right now, to
Mhm.
listen to audiobooks or ebooks. And this is just one more thing for them to listen to. A lot of folks are just staying home and
Yeah.
being safe, and I think that this might just add one more nice piece to their day. You
Yeah,
know, you know.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's just one last thing to mention for those who are just getting into the podcast world. Not only is there every subject out there, but there's also fiction podcasts. So there's ones like mine, there's, news, things like that, but there's also fictional stories. So like you were saying, for those who love to listen to audiobooks, there's some amazing fiction podcasts out there too. So
that is great. That is really great to know.
yeah.
So you YouTube listeners, try out a podcast. I think you're going to enjoy it. And Anna, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and personally being my guinea pig for my first YouTube interview. And thank you for being patient. And I look forward to more of your podcasts, and more subjects that you're going to do. I feel like you have a really good speaking voice, so it's really pleasant to listen to.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yes, and you just put it all together so well. It just makes it very interesting.
Well, that's really good to hear. Thank you so much, Bev. This has been a really fun conversation, and I just really appreciate you asking me.
Okay. All right. All right, YouTubers out there, get podcasting.